Hi people. Um, put the volume up. This is probably going to fall under the category of a left-right video, which I'm always a little bit careful about on my channel because of my own politics being in the centre ground, broadly speaking. But I do have views, and I want to talk about um, exploitation, capitalism, socialism. Right? Those are very, very, very loose terms. But they're all kind of encompassed in this video. Um, a while back, someone asked me what I thought of the government, and I think it might have been in my live stream. Apologies, I can't remember who asked that, but it was a good question. I've been reluctant to criticize the government too much. I think some of the messaging on COVID has been confusing and inconsistent. But I honestly think it's a very complex thing, and so I'm reticent to criticize the government too harshly for its handling of this. Um, but there is one area of conservative thinking that I really, really don't like. Um, and I've just been reminded of it coming off a thread. So, someone put a silly meme about, uh, kind of showed this Marxist, I guess, want to redistribute wealth. Um, and it had this silly kind of generalization of all left-wing people as wanting to go to that level. And I think it quoted Jeff Bezos, actually, CEO of Amazon. I think he's CEO or CFO, can't remember. But anyway, Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world at the moment. Staggeringly rich. I mean, just astronomically rich. This is a guy who literally made 15 billion in one day, which I think might be a record in human history. Um, Even going back throughout history, there's been some super rich people, but that's truly astronomical for a single day. Because of Amazon stocks, Amazon's done well out of COVID. Because people are obviously buying things online. I buy more from eBay myself, but partly because of the things I'm going to say, and eBay may not be much better, so I don't know about that. Here's the thing. I think a lot of conservatives, in my experience, they bristle at the idea. I'm talking here about the Conservative Party. They bristle at the idea that they're a party for the rich. Well, a lot of conservatives aren't rich. They are middle class, and there's even working class Tories. As we saw in the last election, the now well known breaking of the red wall, when you had long held Labour seats like my one. Some of them didn't quite go Tory, but it was quite a shock. A lot of traditionally Labour seats did, and there were a lot of Conservative votes in Sunderland and in other traditionally Labour seats. And there's a range of reasons for that: a mixture of Brexit and animosity towards Corbyn's leadership. But I want to get that out there, so I'm well aware that you can't just miss Conservative Party or Conservatives as a party of the rich for the rich. That's overly simplistic. Remember, Margaret Thatcher was very middle class. She was by no means blue blood. And there's other examples. John Major, of course. And the Tories are actually quite effective at pointing that out. So I remember when David Cameron got into office, there was accusations that his left were guilty of reverse snobbery by highlighting the fact that David Cameron and George Osborne came from quite privileged backgrounds. Personally, I take the view that what really, really matters in a leader is their politics. I don't really care if a leader is rich or from a working class background or an upper class background, whilst if it can mold their thinking. Ultimately, what matters is their ideology. Indeed, there are a lot of very left leaning people, particularly in the arts, that come from very privileged backgrounds. but their politics is pretty left wing. That doesn't make them hypocrites. It's just that's their honest outlook. Um, so I don't believe in judging someone's status in of itself. I think that's wrong, and I do think it's a form of bigotry, actually. However, it's hard to ignore the fact that there are a lot of conservatives who look at someone like Jeff Bezos and they automatically admire him just because he is so rich. I think conservatives do associate success with wealth, and of course, from a practical point of view, if someone's very rich, money moves the world. So if you have a lot of money, that's going to provide you not necessarily with happiness, but it's going to provide you with the tools for a stable and happy life, at least, if not in of itself. But I do think a lot of conservatives admire super wealth. And let's not forget, a lot of conservative MPs are in bed with wealthy Russian oligarchs, and some of whom have ties to the Kremlin regime. So, whilst I think Corbyn deserved all the criticism he got over his Russia stance, the Tories aren't totally innocent in this. I'm just saying that as an example of their attitude to wealth, because a lot of these Russian billionaires, there is some very murky things going on there, particularly in regards to their ties to Vladimir Putin. Um, but you know, I've seen this attitude among conservatives, and if you're a conservative and you don't feel this way, then don't be offended because I'm not talking about every conservative. I'm just saying that it is noticeable, and it's something like this. When you point out exploitation, for example, in Amazon. There were shocking reports coming out earlier this year, and indeed for the last few years, of Dickensian, and I quote Dickensian, conditions in Amazon workhouses. Well, they may as well be workhouses in Amazon warehouses in the UK. I'm not even talking about their outlets in Bangladesh or a developing country, another developing country. I'm talking about the UK here. In one case, a pregnant woman apparently was forced to deliver on the factory floor. Now, of course, a lot of this needs to be authenticated. Claims doesn't necessarily mean truth. I understand that. Nevertheless, Amazon, I would suggest, has had more than its fair share of accusations of harsh working conditions. Now, I take the view that given that Mr. Bezos' wealth has come from his company, he should have a moral obligation to make that an absolute priority. If I was Jeff Bezos and I came across these accusations, I would order an urgent review into UK branches or wherever the claims are coming from. I would say, okay, this is absolute priority. It's the reputation of my company. We need to find out what's going on here. What are the working conditions? Maybe we need to change the working culture. Now, as far as I know, Bezos hasn't prioritized that. Maybe he has, but I haven't seen much indication of that. Um, I certainly don't think it's a priority for someone like Jeff Bezos. Um, but conservatives, I actually came off a thread and I got quite angry about it. This guy claimed, oh, well, if they don't like it, they don't have to work there. No one's forcing them to work there. Instead of playing the victim, they could quit. This is an attitude I find reprehensible, and it is an attitude I have seen among a number of conservative people. I'm not saying every conservative has that view. There will be other right leaning people who don't support that. But it is definitely an attitude that is on the right. I've been pretty critical of the left in terms of woke politics and so on, and I still am. But I do think that sometimes conservatives give the impression that they lack human empathy. Now, am I saying that all conservatives lack empathy? Of course not. I know of individual conservatives who do care about human rights and are decent people individually. But, attitudes like that do look like they put success and profit over people. Another example of that is their attitude to the minimum wage. When the Blair government, thanks to people like Rodney Bickerstaff, the trade unionist Rodney Bickerstaff brought in the minimum wage in, I think it was 1999. The Tories were scaremongering. They were saying, oh, this will destroy small businesses. It will be a disaster. It will ruin the economy. That never happened. And I do appreciate that the minimum wage might be more complex for small businesses. So I would say there should be less of a burden on them. I do think the government should help them in terms of working out tax and so on, because they are under a lot of pressure, and I have a lot of respect for small business owners. But I also take the view that if you're employing someone and you expect them to put in labour to help your company, you need to make sure they are being treated fairly, which includes being paid fairly. Now, the minimum wage is a way to guarantee that a worker, that an employee, that a staff member is paid fairly for the time and effort that they put into a job. And I dread to think what would happen without a minimum wage, without a legally mandated minimum wage. If it wasn't there, then in theory, in practice, and in practice for that matter, employers could pay as little as they want legally. That cannot be right. But again, a lot of conservatives, they only care about profit. They don't care about employee rights. They take the view, well, if the business is doing well, then the country's doing well, the employees are doing well. That's true to an extent. Employers provide work. That's good for the economy, obviously. But we can't overlook things like mental health in the workplace. We can't overlook, for example, what that sort of unhappiness can do to people. I think this is massively overlooked. There's this very kind of clinical approach, I think, taken to labour sometimes, particularly in politics. If things are good for businesses, then they provide work, and that's all great. Well, it's very, very important, of course, but I would argue that just because someone is providing labour doesn't automatically make them a good person. It doesn't make them a good person if they're exploiting that labour. So technically, they're employing people, but if those people are not being paid fairly, or they're working in very unsafe conditions, or being treated very unfairly, I wouldn't argue that's a progressive thing at all. Maybe I just feel strongly about this because I've been in that position. I've been exploited. Certainly when I was a waiter, I experienced that firsthand. And I think the people who come out with this pathetic idea, oh, they could just go elsewhere, they lack empathy. They've clearly never been in that position. It's not that simple to just switch a job. What do they suggest? Okay, they just quit that job and then, oh, they just find another? Not in the current economic environment. And by the way, I'm not saying Amazon is the only company that has a reputation. Sports Direct has an appalling reputation. Um, and I think that it's something that right wingers don't have a good track record on. There will be individual conservatives who, will condemn blatant exploitation because they have to. But I do think when you look at attitudes like, oh, they could just go elsewhere, it really, really speaks volumes and it makes me very angry, actually. And if that makes me a lefty on this subject, so be it. I'm not actually a socialist because I think that socialist philosophy is against all wealth. Now, where I differ is I'm not against wealth. I've no problem with people being well off and enjoying the fruits of their hard work and aspirations. And, that's something where conservatives, that's fine. They say we're the party of aspiration. That's great. My point would be, why does there have to be a conflict between treating people fairly and aspiration? Those two things are not in opposition. It's perfectly compatible to be pro business and pro employee. This is why I think Tony Blair and New Labour was so effective, because they went down the third way approach. Now, the old left really didn't like it because they said they were closet Tories, but it was the Blair government that brought in the minimum wage. So I really refuse to accept this notion that if you're pro employee or workers' rights, you're somehow anti business. I think a lot of socialists are. And, that's just, you only need to look at history to show that failed. It's a failed ideology. But the ultra clinical, callous, conservative thinking, particularly promoted by Thatcherism, I have to say. I mean, let's not forget, when Tories idolise Margaret Thatcher, they conveniently overlook that she presided over a very, very deeply divided country. And they can blame the unions for that. But Thatcher played a very big role in that division as well. Um, so I really think that the third way is a healthy way to look at this. Pro business, yes, but also pro workers' rights, because it's common sense. You don't need to be an economist to see that if someone is content in their workplace, they're going to be a more productive worker. That's better for the business, which is then better for the economy. That's a pro business position. Obviously, there's the other extreme on the left. Constant strikes helps no one. It doesn't help employees. It certainly doesn't help the public. All it does is cause stress and disruption to the public. Um, So I'm not in favor of wildcat strikes, but there is a basic principle here. If people are being treated unfairly, then they have a basic human right to defend themselves. And the Tories' track record is not a good one. They oppose the minimum wage, and okay, things are a bit different now with COVID because the circumstances have changed. But for a long time, their record on welfare was basically getting the DWP to send threatening letters to terminally sick people. But to be fair, New Labour done that to an extent as well. It's not solely the domain of the Tories. But this is something I really, really dislike about conservative thinking: the adulation of wealth, the adulation of wealthy people. This notion that someone's financial status somehow determines their character. I do think that's a very conservative mindset. They will deny it. And okay, you can get far left people also have that mindset where there's reverse snobbery, and they'll assume if someone's wealthy, they're a bad person. That's just as wrong. I see that. But I do think a lot of conservatives think that someone like Jeff Bezos, because he's so successful and so wealthy, oh, well, he must be great. Let's not criticize him. Anyone who criticizes him must be jealous. I wouldn't want the wealth of Jeff Bezos. I really, really wouldn't. Because there's an enormous amount of responsibility with that sort of astronomical wealth. Um, but yeah, it's a mentality I have no time for. And I really resent this idea that if you question it, somehow a fiery communist, or, it's a more lefty side of me, but I really don't accept that you have to be either pro business or pro worker. You can be both. Thanks for listening.